Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really vital subject, the state of press freedom around the world.
Hmm.
We'll be digging into the latest data and analysis, focusing primarily, on the 2024 and 2025 World Press Freedom Index.
Right.
We've pulled together a range of sources for this perspectives, from Swaraja, CEMEX, Asia Democracy Chronicles, some insights on AI from Forbes, a look at best and worst countries via the Indian Express.
Yeah, and GIJN's report on journalism in authoritarian places, plus background on the index itself. A good mix.
Exactly. So our goal here, our mission, if you like, is to really understand what these recent indices are telling us.
Yeah, to get beyond just the rankings, we want to explore the core challenges journalists face globally, sort of unpack the factors influencing press freedom in different regions.
And maybe touch on some criticisms of how it's measured.
Definitely. And look at newer threats, too, like,
Yeah.
like economic pressures and, of course, AI.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The World Press Freedom Index. This is the big one from Reporters Without Borders, RSF. Comes out every year around May 3rd, World Press Freedom Day.
That's the one. It's a massive undertaking, ranking, 180 countries and regions based on the state of journalism there.
And it's not just a number, is it?
No. It tries to assess the actual freedom available to journalists, news outlets, even citizen journalists online.
So what kind of things does it look at?
Well, it looks at everything from how easy it is to access information and express yourself freely, to the dangers, physical threats, harmful practices, restrictive laws, all of that.
And it serves as a kind of benchmark.
Exactly. A tool to monitor challenges, compare countries, track changes over time. You can really see the impact of, say, ruling regimes or political shifts.
And the latest findings, what was the big picture from 2025?
Well, look, the big headline, and it's quite concerning, is that for the first time ever, the overall global situation in 2025 was described as difficult.
Difficult. Wow.
Yeah. It reflects this sort of combination of increased state pressure, economic problems hitting newsrooms, and the whole disinformation mess eroding trust.
A multi-pronged attack, really.
And that's a good way to put it. And linked to that, the economic indicator specifically for the business of truth-telling, it hit an unprecedented critical low in 2025.
So the money side is becoming a huge threat to independence.
A massive threat. And that picture gets even sharper when you look regionally.
Right. Let's zoom in. What about the Middle East and North Africa? That was flagged previously, wasn't it?
It was designated a red zone back in 2024. They saw a pretty big drop, 7.6 points in the political index. The report basically said journalism there is suffocating under the weight of authoritarian regimes.
Grim. Any bright spots, relatively speaking?
Well, bright spots might be strong, but the best-ranked Arab countries were similar to 2023. Mauritania, Comoros, Qatar, and Tunisia.
Okay. And the lowest?
Again, pretty consistent. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, Bahrain, and Syria, right near the bottom.
Egypt fell a bit further in 2024.
Yeah, down 6 places. Interestingly, Tunisia actually showed some relative improvement, despite, everything going on politically there.
Now, Jordan was a weird one, a big jump up, but described as comic. How does that work?
Yeah, that was the RSF correspondent's take.
Yeah.
It highlights a key issue with the index, actually. The overall score improved, maybe on some indicators, but at the same time, dozens of journalists were arrested during pro-Palestine protests, and they brought in a new, very restrictive cybercrime law.
So the headline number hides the reality on the ground.
Exactly. It shows you really need to dig into those sub-indicators, the political context, the legal framework, safety.
Yeah.
The overall rank alone doesn't tell the whole story.
Absolutely. And speaking of safety, the situation in the Palestinian territories mentioned in the 2024 report, just devastating.
Horrific. Over 100 journalists killed in Gaza by the Israeli occupation reported in that period. 22 of them killed while doing their job. Yeah. It put Palestine into the bottom 10 globally for journalist safety. And that had a knock-on effect on Israel's ranking, too.
Israel dropped.
Fell to 101 in 2024, classified as difficult for the first time, down from problematic. The report noted rising restrictions in Gaza and the West Bank, and Lebanon and the UAE also saw significant drops that year.
Okay, let's shift focus. Asia. The 2025 index seemed to really hammer home the economic fragility there.
That's a huge theme, yeah. The economic indicators for press freedom actually fell in 14 out of 25 Asian countries or territories in the 2025 index.
14 out of 25, that's a majority.
It is. And the average economic score in Asia was already the second lowest globally between 2022 and 2024. It's a deepening crisis.
Even in democracies.
Yeah, that's what's striking. Places like Japan and Timor-Leste, both democracies, saw their economic scores worsen significantly, dropping from problematic to difficult. Laos had an even steeper fall into very serious.
Timor-Leste had the biggest drop in Southeast Asia, didn't it?
It did. A 14.7-point decline. And a lot of that seems driven by a media sector that's heavily reliant on volunteers.
So journalists just can't make a living.
Pretty much. They end up leaving for better-paying jobs, often ironically in political parties. Nepal saw a big economic hit too, second biggest decline. Newsroom struggling, journalists not getting paid for months sometimes.
And alongside the economic woes, state control remains a major issue across Asia.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
China and North Korea saw the steepest overall declines in Asia in 2025. They're still firmly in the very serious category, media basically seen as propaganda tools.
And Hong Kong.
Also now, very serious. The national security laws have a chilling effect. Arrests, detentions, long sentences. The ranking plummeted to 140th in 2025.
And in big markets like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, ownership is an issue.
Very much so. Media markets often dominated by conglomerates with strong political connections. That inevitably shapes coverage.
The report mentioned the Adani acquisition of NDTV in India specifically.
Yes, it was cited as an example, suggesting an independent outlet became more aligned with the government narrative after the takeover. And Indonesia's faced huge media layoffs, over 1,200 between 2023 and 2024, just due to economic struggles.
Let's focus on India for a moment. Ranked 151st in 2025. That's actually up 8 places from 159th in 2024.
It is an improvement on the surface.
But how does that fit the longer trend? Wasn't it falling before?
It was, significantly. In 2022, India fell to 150th from 142nd the year before. RSF noted increased targeting of journalists, crackdowns on dissent back then.
And going way back.
If you go all the way back to the first index in 2002, India was ranked 80th. So yes, there's been a recent uptick, but the overall trend over 2 decades is a pretty steep decline.
Right, that context is crucial. So 151st now, who's at the very top and very bottom in 2025?
The top 10, best press freedom, mostly familiar names, predominantly European and Scandinavian. Norway's number 1 again, then Estonia, Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Ireland, Portugal, Switzerland, and Czechia.
A clear pattern there. Strong democracies.
Generally, yes. Robust legal systems, political stability. And the bottom 10, sadly, also show a pattern.
Authoritarian states.
Overwhelmingly. Eritrea is last, then North Korea, China, Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Vietnam, Nicaragua, and Russia. Places with severe restrictions, little space for independent media.
Okay, let's talk about how the index is actually put together, the methodology. It changed a few years ago, right?
It did. Since 2022, it's based on 5 key indicators, 5 pillars, you could say.
Which are?
Political context, so support for media autonomy, legal framework at TONL, the laws affecting journalists, economic context, financial viability, ownership concentration, socio-cultural context, social or religious pressures, self-censorship, and finally, safety tracking, violence, threats, arrests.
And before that?
From 2013 to 2021, it used 7 criteria, slightly different breakdown, covering things like pluralism, independence, infrastructure, abuses. The current method uses quantitative scores for violations, plus qualitative input from questionnaires sent to experts, journalists, academics, lawyers.
Right, but this methodology, it's not without its critics.
Definitely not. There's been quite a bit of pushback or questioning.
Like what?
Well, one point raised, particularly regarding the Arab region, is that most of the experts filling out these questionnaires aren't actually from the region.
So potentially lacking local nuance.
That's the concern. Can you really get the full picture without that deep, on-the-ground understanding? Ola Al-Kharizli from Akid in Jordan made a great point about needing to look beyond the overall score.
Like the Jordan example we discussed.
Exactly. How improvements in one indicator can mask serious declines in another, like the political context. And how much weight does a new restrictive law, like Jordan's cybercrime law, actually get in the legislative score? It's not always clear.
There's also a suggestion that the rankings can be, well, politicized.
Yes, that's been raised. An anonymous Egyptian journalist suggested to SMEX that sometimes high rankings for certain Arab countries might actually reflect a lack of a challenging press, rather than genuine freedom. The methodology maybe doesn't capture all the local complexities beyond pure journalism.
And transparency issues.
Concerns about the opaqueness of the survey itself. The specific scores for each question or category aren't public, nor is the list of respondents. So it's hard to fully scrutinize how the final number is reached.
Swaraja also had a critique about funding and potential bias.
Right. They pointed out that RSF gets significant funding from Western governments and ideologically aligned donors. Their argument is that this makes it hard to be sure the assessment is purely objective. And maybe nations with independent foreign policies get harsher treatment because their narratives don't align, not necessarily because press freedom is worse.
Interesting perspective. Okay, moving on to the broader threats. The 2025 index really flagged economic fragility.
Hugely important point. It's seen as a major threat globally,
Huh.
but especially highlighted in Asia this time. The report basically says news outlets are caught in this bind, trying to stay independent editorially while just trying to survive financially.
And that makes them more vulnerable.
Absolutely. Especially in politically unstable places. Plus, you have the trend of media ownership concentrating in fewer hands.
Which limits diversity of voices.
Exactly. And can lead to more self-censorship. And then in countries like Russia, you have significant state ownership, which is another massive constraint.
And then there's the elephant in the room. AI, artificial intelligence. Forbes looked into this.
Yeah, AI is rapidly changing everything, including journalism, how information is gathered, processed, spread.
Opportunities and risks, I assume?
Both. Opportunities like easier access to information, maybe better global communication. But the risks are serious.
Such as?
Spreading mis- and disinformation at scale, amplifying online hate, enabling new kinds of censorship, mass surveillance of journalists,
Wow.
and the control that big tech platforms have over content through their algorithms. There's a fear it could homogenize media, push out smaller players.
And politicians can misuse it?
Absolutely. Using AI for disinformation campaigns, states using it to surveil journalists, creating a real chilling effect.
Yeah.
And women journalists are particularly targeted with tech-based abuse, deepfakes, doctored images, targeted harassment.
The concentration of AI power in just a few companies is worrying, too.
Very much so. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for transparency, how data is used, how content is curated, how algorithms work, and crucially, ensuring journalists are safe from attacks, surveillance, and harassment, both online and off.
Finally, let's touch on that GIJN report about journalists working under authoritarian regimes. The conditions must be incredibly tough.
Extremely challenging and dangerous. Limited access to info, heavy censorship, constant threat of persecution, physical danger.
And new laws making it even harder.
Yes, like in Russia,
Right.
regarding the Ukraine war coverage. And it's not just the journalists. Their sources are often at great risk, too. Think of, say, street vendors in Cuba being penalized for talking to the media.
And measuring impact is harder there, too.
Much harder. Traditional metrics like readership or engagement often don't apply or can't be tracked reliably. That makes getting funding difficult sometimes.
But the impact is still there, even if it's less obvious.
Absolutely. GIGN highlighted some really crucial, less traditional impacts, like documenting human rights abuses that international bodies can then use, or raising the profile of local NGOs, helping them get support, providing evidence that informs legal action elsewhere, like Armando.info's work on Venezuelan corruption being used in U.S. cases.
Connecting people across borders, too.
Yes, building community, independent media, helping Cuban migrants stay informed about protests back home, for example, and crucially, just leaving a record for the future. Countering state narratives. Think about the reporting on Tiananmen Square, that's historical memory.
So they have to find different ways to make a difference.
Exactly. They need to be innovative about generating and showing their impact in these really tough environments.
Right. Well, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive into global press freedom.
It's a complex picture.
It really is. So to sort of recap, the World Press Freedom Index gives us this valuable, if sometimes debated, snapshot. It shows worrying trends, economic pressures, rising dangers in many places.
And while the methodology gets critiqued, the index and reports like the ones we discussed highlight absolutely critical issues about the press's ability to operate freely.
Then you have AI layering on new opportunities, but also significant threats. And the vital, courageous work journalists do in authoritarian regimes, even when their impact isn't immediately obvious.
It all paints a picture of a field under pressure from multiple angles.
So thinking about all this, the complexities, the controversies around measurement, the evolving threats, maybe a final thought for you, the listener. What responsibility do we as individuals have in trying to sort through information, find reliable sources, and maybe even support independent journalism, both, where we live and further afield?
That's a really important question to consider. In this landscape, what's our role in protecting and valuing a free press? Something to definitely think about.